recording again. Okay, so a very warm welcome back to this session. So what we did was we ran the breakout sessions where you were exposed to the software and you were able to run the software yourself and get the same results which you were seeing on the PowerPoint presentation. Now with that, before I go ahead and finish the remaining part of our this workshop, any questions, any feedback, anything that you would want to talk about here from your experience, anything that should inform our remaining part of this workshop? So everything seems good. There were a couple of questions. Okay, yes, the 3 sets of solutions. So, okay, I'll do that. Okay, fine. Others as well. So Siv, your question is about the 3 outcomes. What were you saying, right? So a student mentioned she wanted to get more information about the qualitative calibration. We'll address that now. Amir, you also had a point. You were saying that the software is the easier part, and what you wanted to focus on, something again? Yeah. So Amir made a point. We had other point as well. Making sense of the results. Okay. Yep. With these 3 sets of outcomes. Oh, okay, fine. Okay, let me again go through the thing, right, and explain. Remember, we are using necessary and sufficient condition analysis to establish causality, because this causality would help us explain, or would be based on conjecture, equifinality, and also asymmetry. And we get these 3 solutions, and I mentioned to you the complex solution solely relies on empirical evidence, parsimonious, something apart from our empirical findings as well, and intermediate basis on this, our researchers' input as well. We can guide the generation of results based on our prior expectations of the causal links. That's what these 3 solutions do. Now let's go to the results here. Now, how to interpret the results? Now we've got the first complex solution, which are purely based on the empirical evidence. So can somebody tell me what were the 2 necessary conditions that we observed, we found from our data, more than 0.90? Anybody? So which were here? Literate
and stable.
Literate and stable, right? Let's find out if literate and stable are there. So if we go here, so the complex solution is actually giving us 2 separate pathways. If you go to your data or your results, you've got this and this. So it says it's an odd thing. It is telling you that 2 pathways. It is giving you equifinality. It's showing you just the complex solution that are highly developed and low urban. So remember, this is negation. Low urban and also a highly literate and highly stable country would lead to survival. That's one pathway. Another pathway is a developed country, a literate country, an industrial country, and a stable country. So these 2 pathways would lead to survival. So we've got 2 pathways towards the same outcome. Again, goes on to show the equifinality principle of QCA. Now, you would know, just mention to me literate and stable, right? These were the two things that were part of the necessary condition that we identified. You would be able to see that literate and stable are part of the complex solution itself. So both of the different pathway, a country that is developed, is not urban, is literate, and is stable, is likely to survive the economic and social upheavals. And a country, urban is not nowhere, which is developed, literate, industrial, and stable, would also survive the economic and social upheavals. This is based on our empirical data. Two separate pathways we've got here. Now, there are certain specific, raw coverage, unique coverage, consistency. So each solution would have raw coverage, which is slightly different to unique coverage, and you can go and have a look on what they specifically mean. And consistency is something that our results are based on. You would be able to see that all of the results that we've got are more than 80%, because that's what we focus on. Like, that was our threshold. Here, 80%, 80%, 80%. Here as well. Now the second one is parsimonious one. Remember, I said to you that yes, we have got empirical data, but we need to look beyond the empirical observations that we've got. For that, logical remainders, so the software, or there is an algorithm in FSQCA, this particular, which generates additional configurations which are not empirically observed. And if we include that one, we get parsimonious. The principle here is that we should be able to get results that are applicable to beyond our empirical findings as well. So that's what we call parsimonious. And parsimonious tells us that only developed countries and stable countries are likely to survive economic upheavals. That's what parsimonious tells us. And when we go to the intermediate solution, now what we're doing is, yes, so let's go back. Complex is just our empirical observations. Parsimonious are empirical and additional observations, which are not empirically observed. So empirical and additional information. Intermediate, empirical, additional configurations, which are guided by our prior expectations. Remember the dialog box that came and we were to select? That's what we get as intermediate solution. And the intermediate solution tells us that developed, literate, a country which is developed, which is literate, and which is stable is likely to survive economic upheavals, social upheavals. So these are the three solutions, and these are their explanations. Now, in order to present them, and as I mentioned to you, FIS 2011 has given a framework which is the most commonly used. If we were to identify according to FIS framework, what we have to do is we need to identify which conditions are common to both parsimonious and intermediate. FIS framework, which is in the next slide, it explains the results in terms of core and peripheral conditions. A core condition is that condition that's common to both parsimonious and intermediate solutions. So here what we see, developed, stable, are the core conditions that have stronger causal effect in terms of survival of a democracy in the times of social and economic upheaval. Whereas literate is only present in intermediate solution, so we call that literate as peripheral condition, less important but less important when compared to core condition. So if we were to present that results in terms of FIS framework, which we should, because now that's the expectation, if you want to publish your results, you have to use the framework of core and peripheral conditions. Then you have to take the parsimonious solution, take the intermediate solution, identify the common causal conditions that become your core conditions, and then other conditions become, which are just there in intermediate, like in this case literate, becomes your peripheral condition. And all other conditions, because they are not present, they become don't care. Their presence or absence doesn't really matter. They're not significant in terms of causing, or important. Let's do important. Is not a necessary condition. No, I tell you why. I tell you why. So the two necessary conditions that we identified was literate and stable. But those necessary conditions were identified based on our empirical data. And the solution that is based solely on empirical data is clearly showing that literate and stable is part of both conditions based on the 90%. But here, what we've done is we have brought in additional things. In the parsimonious solution, we have, they call it counterfactual. Counterfactual means what facts we identified, then there is a counterfactual analysis as part of parsimonious solution just to counter check what facts we observe. So they're called counterfactual analysis. So parsimonious and intermediate solution has got more input values than just the empirical data. For intermediate theoretical, yes, for intermediate theoretical or substantive knowledge, theoretical or substantive knowledge would come in, yes, for intermediate. For parsimonious, simply logical remainders or counterfactual analysis. Okay, Sif? For intermediate, our substantive or theoretical knowledge would come in. Good, thanks. Okay. Now, once we have identified the core and peripheral conditions, which we explain here, then we present our results like this. So this is our three configurations or typology. We can, the HP1, HP2, these are, you can call it taxonomy as well. So these are the things that we would get. So this is what I mentioned earlier, the taxonomy that we develop based on our empirical results. So quickly speaking, what we've done is we actually operationalized. We had the calibrated data. We ran the software, which you saw was pretty simple, right? Few minutes, right? That was software is so simple. Actually, you can do all this thing in an Excel sheet in few hours. It's as simple a concept. But the key thing is, you know, the front end. So just laying out your research in a way that actually leads to this type of analysis. And then once you finish the analysis, you are able to make sense of this thing to generate additional insights. So that's the challenge. So let's put it this way, Sif. After a month, few hours, right? Okay. So this was the breakout session that we did. Now let's go to the putting it all together. That's the most important chunk. Now, there was a specific phrase which I used throughout called configuration theorizing. And that was by design. Because for the last 5-6 years, I've been trying to make sense of these things. I joined some forums as well, learned with some of my colleagues as well. But it was a piecemeal effort, right? And I struggled a great deal. Why? Because software was easy. I knew what the software is doing, but how to link everything together. Then in 2020, I came across a paper in Academy of Management by Funari, and this is about 5-6 people. All of them have been working on QCA for some years, right? So they are the thought leaders in the QCA domain. So they coined this term configuration theorizing. It was used previously, but the way they coined it, actually it was giving a roadmap of implementing it as in a study, in a research study. So if you go through this one, what they say is they call it the stages and the heuristics of the configurational theorizing process. It talks about anything, everything before actually running the software. The major chunk is before running the software. They say that the configuration theorizing, which is implemented through QCA, actually comprises of 3 steps. The number 1 step is scoping. Then we've got linking, and then we've got naming. If we follow the same steps, right, then we are really making a strong and coherent argument, configurational argument, and then proving it empirically based on configuration theorizing. So that's the complete set of complete process that we must follow. What we did was a small chunk of it, running the analysis, which is easy part. What they said, scoping, and then they're giving the descriptions as well. So within scoping, they identified 3 points. Complexify from an anchor, identify plausible coherence. Looks, difficult phrases, but you can go and look at the description to make it easy for me, for you, for everybody. What they said is, because you are doing configurational theorizing, you need to see how one explanatory factor or attribute works with others. So first, coming up with configuration theorizing, you need to identify which explanatory factor is is an anchor, and then work around how it would combine with other explanatory factors. Then identify plausible coherence. How different themes would be orchestrated based on putting these attributes together, how they would be orchestrated together in a combination or in configurations. That's the second part. So again, it's designing, problematizing your research. So what is the problem you're going to solve in terms of configurations? Third one is simplify to higher order constructs. So as always is the case, you identify different attributes. Some of the attributes can be combined in similar higher order capping, right? You could do that as well. See if you could do that. That's part of scoping. And the next one is the middle ground between actually doing it and just linking. So think conjunctively. So when after you have identified, like, the COVID-19 response, you identified 5, 6 factors, right? So we have identified the factors now based on the scoping thing. Next thing is think about the steps. No, Siv, you haven't even touched your results. No, it's before. It's the stage that you're identifying the attributes. It's actually the framework that you're using, or theorizing, the front end of the paper. You haven't gone to the results. Okay, designing, it's the designing. Scoping is when you're scoping your research, identifying or problematizing your research. So you do scoping, these 3 steps, and then linking. So after you identified your attributes, 5 attributes, and you think that they should work, they should have some relationship. Now, specific types of relationship. For example, we all know that at a higher level, it would always be a complementary and a substitution. Some factors would complement, some factors would replace each other. But you have to be more specific. That's a very high level general thing. You're more specific in what type of complementarity, what type of contingency. That's what we call as think conjunctively and be specific, not loose. Oh, high level, they're going to have some sort of complementary. A hypothesis based on, complementarity or conjunctivity should be very specific. What type of complementary? So this factor is going to combine with this one to mutually enhance each other. That's what we get more specific. Then equifinal. If there could be multiple pathways like the one I just showed you in the results. Think about absence. In some cases, absence of a factor would contribute to the strength or to an outcome. So that asymmetry, this is asymmetry. This is equifinally, conjunctivity, but more specific now. Here it was high level, right? Loose. Now you become more specific here. Now, after you've done this thing, linking, now you go and tell your results. You do your analysis after the linking stage. So once you've done the linking stage, you get your results. Now the third thing is labeling, right? So you got your configurations. You got multiple configurations. Like in the previous complex solution, we had 2 configurations. And then each configuration had different attributes. Now, how to make sense of that? Again, they've got this three heuristics: articulate with simplicity, capture the whole. So capture the whole means, come up with an argument based on configuration. So also talks what this whole configuration is talking about. Also talk about the individual elements of each configuration. So that's explaining the results. Another part is naming. Remember the famous the typologies and the mile and snow typologies, those sorts of things. It's the same process and more organized, more objective. So if you can come up with that, you should come up with an appropriate name as well. What I've done is, so this is Furnari et al. 2020, the paper that I've cited, my own paper. I've tried to implement that, and Malik et al. Have a look at the scoping, linking, and naming, and I've tried to explain the results in terms of the naming thing as well. So evoking the essence of configurations, capturing the whole, articulate with sim. So I've tried to do that, and I've referred to Furnari. See how is that interpretation? How is that implementation? See if you can learn something from that as well. And also in this, they say it's an iterative process. When you do scoping, you do linking, then you run your analysis. And if the analysis comes up with a very different results, then go back, right? So there's a feedback loop, and then refine your scoping stage, refine your linking stage. So it's not that you have finished that one and then you take your results. If the results are very different to your initial scoping, go back and revise that. It's okay. It's an iterative in nature, because these are conjunctions, simple not X affecting Y. How different factors combine, causal complexity. So iteration or iterative working is absolutely fine. In fact, recommended by Furnari 2020, and these people are the thought leaders in this realm, starting from 2011, 2012, Fez, Mezanji. All these people have been working, and so they have put together their learning over many years into this paper, how to do the front end of the an FSQCA based research. We call that as, so remember what's this? Designing a QCA study based on configuration theorizing. So we are configuration theorizing our study. This is what is the most important thing. Rest is easy. So linking, you do your results and then you present your results based on the naming heuristics. Now, the second part is quantitative research design. So broad research, now we'll also talk about in terms of quantitative and qualitative. For survey research, it's pretty easy, right? You've got the Likert scale, you could follow the same steps. And then key thing is that your hypothesis should follow configuration theorizing, not simple X affects Y. So your hypothesis should have conjunction, equifinality, and asymmetry. Otherwise, there is no point in using FSQCA. So risk using FSQCA with the simple, where is that? I do not have that. I think I've deleted that. Sorry. So the risk is using FSQCA, but having simple hypothesis. Hypothesis should reflect conjunction, should reflect equifinality, or should reflect asymmetry. You can go and read my paper, Malik et al. 2020, how the hypothesis in those case propositions were framed. So it should not be X affects Y. It should not be mediating or moderating. It should be, the more specific causal combinations. What type of combinations? And that you identify through scoping, linking, and naming is the last stage. So that's what configuration theorizing should be. Okay. So non-survey based, and Andres is here. He was asking me. So it's not Likert scale. It's different scales. But again, the calibration process is the most important one. And calibration process must follow substantive knowledge or must be evidence-based. So go and have a look. one Douglas is a study, but it uses secondary data, I think. Go to Douglas. Mine is secondary data as well. Go and have a look how give different scales, right? Andrews, there were some 3-point scales, there were some 4-point scales, there were some 6-point scales. And then for each scale, I tried to provide a justification, a bit of a substantive knowledge to explain the why or the be more transparent. So the calibration process is important, and then once the calibration process is done, then the research hypothesis should reflect configuration theorizing. That's the most important thing. Okay, qualitative research design, and one of the students asked about it. Before anything, I'll be honest in saying that all of my research on QCA is based on quantitative data. So I've not taken interview data and calibrated that. However, I can guide you to the resources and my understanding. So I have the understanding, I haven't implemented that. So principal consideration is how to calibrate qualitative data. That's the same, right? Once you calibrate that, once you quantify that, then it becomes a normal FSQCA study. Two main considerations. You can go to this D block and WIS 2019. That's a systematic lit review of using calibration for qualitative studies, a very important study. So if your research is qualitative and you want to convert interviews and other qualitative data into what are the different calibration themes that have been used, go and read that one, right? I'll take some of those things and talk about that in the presentation just now. So there are three, as always, calibration, whether quantitative data, we need three thresholds: full membership, full non-membership, and crossover point, right? So membership of the set, non-membership of the set, and crossover point. Now that's the threshold, and then the second one is, what is the specific degree of set membership for this particular case. Once we calibrate, then we can follow the same CDE. So the key thing is calibration. So calibration, follow CDE, and use configuration theorizing for 2020 to drive the research design. So let's talk about the different strategies to determine the threshold for inclusion and exclusion of a set: membership, non-membership. Now, because exploratory studies, qualitative studies are richer, so probably it's going to be difficult of having a template thing, because each research would depend upon the richness of the information it's generating. However, all the studies that you see here, 4, 5, 6, 7 studies, they developed a customized rubric or coding scheme to assign codes to outcome and conditions. So based on your qualitative data, you'll have certain themes. You'll have certain, underlying themes. Go and have a read here, how they have used to come up with the customized rubric and coding stage as well. Another one is construct an imaginary case with full membership. So what you would get is real data, right? They may not have full membership, they have partial. So what would be the ideal scenario look like? That's one example as well. Then another is a generic membership evaluation template, which TOTH did as well. Some use some clustering mechanism as well. I did a study. I finished with clustering analysis. I could have done FSQCA in there but I didn't have the outcome there. They were just the input conditions there. So if I had over there, so what I did was simple dichotomization 1-0, present absent. So some of the qualitative themes, you may not be able to get the degree of membership or degree of difference, like 0.5, 0.6. You may easily be able to identify 1 or 0. That's what a cluster analysis would be similar to what I'm suggesting here. So there are different type of approaches, as is the case with qualitative. It has to correspond to the rich or detailed information that's coming from your interview. Generally speaking, these would be your go-to resources in order to align or to shape your qualitative design of assigning, the strategy assigning of determining the thresholds for inclusion and exclusion would come. Crisp set would be a good starting point. Maybe you just start with crisp set and then move toward fuzzy set. Another one is, and it's how to, as I said, crisp set is easier, 1 0 present absent. However, the the degree of presence of a theme, is it strongly present, somewhat present, those sorts of things. The easiest thing, which I tried to do with one interview, I asked actually, okay, based on this thing, how would you call it? Small, medium, large. So those sorts of things could be one way if you're using FSQCA. If you're not using FSQCA, then you can simply present absent, present absent, present absent, crisp set QCA. And once you do that, then obviously there are some other ways as well. So qualitative is much more nuanced, much more technical as compared to the quantitative one, where you like it and you just trying to ensure which one would match where. Qualitative, you need to do this bit of a significant intermediate processing before you take a calibration and actually implement it. So it, again, principle is be transparent and provide as much support in terms of the choices you make for calibration. Okay, lastly, the best practices, and we are running out of time as well. So best practices are simply, right, evidence-based, using substantive knowledge, transparency, reproducibility. The paper that I've got published, I've tried to be very transparent. So if you follow the steps, you should be able to implement it yourself. So that's what, like any journal research, should be: transparent, reproducible, evidence-based. For best practices, there are 3 papers that I'm citing here, and they're very specific calibration type of data to use. So all these 3 papers together should provide you a good basis to get started. That's the research conceptualization, research design in implementing QCA. Crackhammer and Papas and Woodside is a good QCA. Okay. Lastly, useful resources. Now, what I'll do is, there are some list of useful resources that you could go and have a look. My video, you already got this one, and I'll send this PowerPoint, this PDF. So for those PBR students, you'll have it in your Canvas shell. Those outside the PBR practice by research, those students who are outside the guest here, I would send this as the same meeting invite, so you could get the PDF and also access. One thing that I really would want you to do is, yeah, I don't know. I don't have any PBS students. So it's PhD by practice, those sorts of things where industry professionals come and work here. Okay, before you guys go, I've got 2 questions, and I would want your feedback here. Number 1 is, I would want you to complete a short survey just on how the workshop was and if it was useful, for my own sake. Nobody is going to have a look, just myself. And the second one, and it's an anonymous survey, so please complete this one, would take few seconds of yours, right? So that's one thing. And the second one is, one of the purpose for this workshop was that we learn from each other and we establish a community of practice, right? So we establish a community of practice after this one. So what I'll do is, there's another separate survey. So, and in that survey, if you're interested to be part of that community of practice, you can be outside Swinburne, but still part of that group. It's an academic collaboration. So please mention your interest there, register your email, and also one thing that you would want from that proposed community of practice, right? Knowledge sharing, right? Just learning from each other. One thing that you would want from that community of practice. So if you spend your time in that, if you engage with that community of practice, what's the one objective that you would want that community of practice to deliver for you, right? So these are the 2 things that I would want you to complete before you go. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you found value from this exercise, and I tried to make it easy as well, but then also provide in-depth understanding. so that if you want it, you're able to do it yourself. Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, pleasure. Thank you very much. Please complete these two surveys. Very important for me, especially the community of practice, right? So feedback is good, but the community of practice is that really want. So I spent many years doing it by myself, but I really want a company here, company for you as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.